The man who stepped off the private jet at Heathrow that Tuesday morning was not a diplomat, nor was he a member of any official trade delegation. His name was Randall Stone, a 53-year-old construction magnate from Tulsa, Oklahoma, and he had arrived in London on what he described to the immigration officer as a patriotic vacation. He was 6'4" with a sunburned face, silver hair swept back like a televangelist, and a lapel pin so large it could be seen from the baggage claim. He wore a red "Make America Great Again" hat, pulled low over his brow, and his suitcase was adorned with stickers of American eagles. Randall had never been to Europe. He had no interest in history, architecture, or art. And he was here for one reason: to see with his own eyes the places he had spent years watching on Fox News and listening to talk radio about. He wanted to walk where Churchill walked. He wanted to stand where the Queen sat. And most of all, he wanted to see the King's guards, those stoic, motionless soldiers in bearskin hats, and let them know exactly what he thought of their king. His wife, Brenda, had refused to come. His daughter, a sophomore at Oberlin, had called him a cultural arsonist and hung up. So Randall came alone, fueled by cheap airline whiskey and a conviction that the British had forgotten who saved them in 1944. He took a black cab from the airport, complaining loudly about the fare, the narrow streets, and the cute little cars. The driver, a Sikh man in his 60s named Gurpreet. I listened patiently as Randall explained that the United States was the greatest country on earth and that the Brits had better remember who their real friends were. Gurpreet nodded, adjusted his mirror, and quietly turned up the classical radio station to drown him out. Randall's hotel was near Victoria Station, a mid-tier establishment with striped wallpaper and a lift the size of a telephone booth. He dropped his bags, checked his reflection in the mirror, adjusted his red hat, and stepped back out into the gray London drizzle. He had one destination on his mind: Buckingham Palace. The palace forecourt was crowded with tourists, families from Japan, school groups from Germany, honeymooners from Brazil, all holding umbrellas and selfie sticks, all waiting for the changing of the guard. Randall pushed his way to the front, and elbowing past a Spanish couple without apology. He planted his feet directly in front of the black iron railings, directly in front of the guard mounted on the massive black horse. The guard was a young woman. Beneath the bearskin cap, her face was pale and smooth, her eyes fixed on the middle distance. Rain dripped from her helmet onto the scarlet tunic. Her name was Lily Chen. She was 22 years old, and she had been in the British Army for 3 years. Her parents had emigrated from Hong Kong in the 90s. Her father drove a delivery van. Her mother worked in a care home. Lily had joined up to pay for university, but she had stayed because she discovered something she hadn't expected. She loved the discipline. She loved the history. She loved the quiet dignity of standing guard outside the home of her sovereign. And she did not break her gaze when Randall Stone stepped in front of her horse. He stood there, legs apart, hands on his hips. He looked up at her. He looked at the horse. He turned to the crowd as if checking that people were watching. Then he said, loud enough for the front row to hear, "You know, if it wasn't for America, you'd all be speaking German." A few tourists shuffled awkwardly. A British mother pulled her children closer. Lily did not move. Her horse, a 17-year-old gelding named Nelson, flicked an ear. Randall tried again. "I voted for Trump twice. Best president we ever had. And you know what he says about you guys? He says the royals are fine people, but they're just celebrities with titles, nothing but decoration." Still, Lily did not move, but something shifted behind her eyes. She had heard this before, and she had stood this post in rain, snow, and the blistering heat of the 2022 summer when the pavement melted. She had been shouted at by drunks, propositioned by bachelors, and once had a half-eaten kebab thrown at her horse. She had never broken formation. She would not break now. But Randall was not finished. He stepped closer to the railing, his face reddening. "I read about your king. Man talks to plants, thinks a cabbage is a companion, and you stand here in the rain, protecting a man who does nothing but inherit money and sign papers. You ever think about that? You ever think about what you're really doing with your life?" The horse shifted its weight. Lily's gloved hand tightened imperceptibly on the rein. A park warden nearby began to walk over. A police officer, sipping coffee from a thermos, straightened up. But before either could intervene, something unexpected happened. An elderly British man, thin and stooped, wearing a faded regimental tie beneath a worn Burberry raincoat, stepped out of the crowd. He was holding a folded newspaper and a Marks & Spencer bag. He looked at Randall. He looked at the guard. Then he spoke, in a voice like gravel wrapped in velvet. "I was at Arnhem, you ignorant colonial." The crowd went quiet. The old man continued, "And that girl on that horse, she's not a decoration. She's a soldier. Same as I was. Same as my father was at the Somme. She stands here so that clowns like you can fly 4,000 miles and shout into the rain without getting shot. That's what service looks like. Not a flag on your lapel, not a hat on your head. Service." Randall opened his mouth, then closed it. Lily, still staring straight ahead, felt the corner of her mouth twitch. Just slightly. Just for a moment. The police officer arrived. He spoke quietly to Randall, who was now deflating visibly. A few tourists applauded the old man. He ignored them, tucked his newspaper under his arm, and shuffled away toward the mall. But the story did not end there. The next morning, Randall Stone woke with a headache and a vague sense of shame he did not want to examine. Had he ordered black coffee from room service, drank it while staring at the curtain, and decided he was not going to be run out of town by some old bloke with a chip on his shoulder? He had paid good money for this trip. He was going to see Windsor Castle if it killed him. He took the train from Paddington, still wearing the red hat. He sat alone, scrolling through his phone, reading angry comments from his golf buddies back home who thought he was being silenced by the liberal media. One friend had written, "Don't let them bully you, Randy. The Brits are just jealous they lost the empire." He clung to those words. Windsor was crowded, but Randall managed to buy a ticket and shuffle through the state apartments with the rest of the tourists. He saw the Queen's dollhouse, the paintings by Rembrandt, the gilded ceilings. And he felt nothing. It all looked like a museum. It all looked like the past. Then he stepped out into the quadrangle and saw the guard. This one was different. He was a young man, no older than 25, standing at ease near the entrance to the round tower. He had a thin face and red hair, and his tunic seemed slightly too large for his narrow shoulders. His name was Jamie McLeod, and he had joined the army to escape a fishing village in the Highlands, where the only future was gutting herring or watching the tourists photograph the old man of store. Jamie was quiet, introverted, and wrote poetry he never showed anyone. He suffered from chronic asthma and had nearly been rejected from service, but he had trained harder than anyone in his platoon and earned his bearskin through sheer stubbornness. Jamie had not had a good week, yet his mother was ill. His girlfriend had ended their relationship via text message. He had stood this post for 3 hours in the rain, and his boots were soaked through. Randall approached. He did not shout this time. He had learned, perhaps, that shouting did not produce the effect he wanted. Instead, he adopted a tone of condescending reason. He stood a few feet from the guard, tilted his head, and spoke as if addressing a child. "Son," he said, "I want you to really think about something. You're a young man. You could be doing anything. You could be learning a trade, starting a business, making something of yourself. Instead, you're standing out here in the cold, dressed up like a toy soldier, guarding a building where a man sits on a throne he didn't earn. Does that make sense to you?" In what universe is that a rational use of a human life? Jamie did not answer. He did not blink. But inside his chest, something cracked. He thought of his mother, who had worked double shifts at the Inverness Tesco to buy him a second-hand clarinet. He thought of his grandfather, who had lied about his age in 1941 and served on the Arctic convoys, returning home with frozen feet and a hatred of silence. He thought of the oath he had taken, to serve the crown, to defend the realm, to give his life if required. It was not a transaction. It was not a job. It was a covenant. Randall was still talking. I mean, look at you. You're a grown man wearing a fur hat that weighs more than your rifle. You stand here for hours and don't even move. It's theater. It's cosplay. Don't you feel ridiculous? A muscle in Jamie's jaw tightened, and his vision blurred slightly. He was not crying. He would not cry, but the pressure behind his eyes was immense. A tourist nearby, a young woman from Manchester, noticed. She nudged her boyfriend. That Yank's being a right tosser, she whispered. Jamie heard her. He also heard something else. The distant chime of the castle clock, the coo of pigeons in the eaves, the rustle of his standard as the wind caught it. And he heard, beneath Randall's monologue, the voice of his own father, who had died when Jamie was 12. His father had been a fisherman, not a soldier, but he had understood duty. He had gone out in storms that turned the sea to iron, and he had never complained, because that was what men did. You stand your post, his father had said once, and you don't ask why. You just stand. Jamie stood. Randall, I'm frustrated by the lack of reaction, leaned closer. He was now inches from the barrier. Cat got your tongue? Or are you trained not to talk to real people? A supervisor appeared, a sergeant major with a chest full of medals and a face like a clenched fist. He spoke quietly to Randall. Sir, you need to step back. Randall puffed up. I'm exercising my free speech. I'm an American citizen. You're on British soil, the sergeant major said, and that soldier is on duty. You will step back, or you will be escorted off the premises. Randall looked around for support. He found none. The other tourists were staring at him with expressions ranging from irritation to open hostility. A child pointed and asked his mother why the man was so angry. He stepped back, but as he did, he caught Jamie's eye. Just for a second. And in that second, Aunt Jamie allowed himself the smallest, almost imperceptible movement, a slight straightening of the spine, a lifting of the chin. It was not a response. It was not a concession. It was a declaration. I am still here. I am still standing. You have not moved me. Randall turned away. He spent the rest of the afternoon wandering the grounds, but the fire had gone out of him. He ate a bland sandwich in the cafeteria. He bought a keychain in the gift shop. He caught his reflection in a window and was startled by how small he looked. That evening, Randall did something he had not planned. He walked to the Churchill War Rooms. It was almost closing time. The staff were tired and eager to go home, but they let him in. He moved through the underground corridors alone, reading the placards, staring at the maps, the dusty telephones, and the single bed where a prime minister had slept while German bombs fell on the city above. He stopped in front of a display case containing a letter, handwritten, from Winston Churchill to Franklin Roosevelt. It was dated March 1941. Britain stood alone. The Blitz had killed thousands. The shipping lanes were choked with U-boats. Churchill was not asking for soldiers. He was asking for rusting destroyers, for canned meat, for anything that might buy a few more months. Give us the tools, the letter read, and we will finish the job. Randall stared at the glass. He thought of his grandfather who had landed at Omaha Beach on D-Day, who never spoke of it, who sat in his garage every evening until he died. just sitting, staring at the wall. Randall had never understood that silence. He had interpreted it as stoicism, as strength. Now, standing in this bunker, surrounded by the ghosts of men who had carried the weight of civilization on their backs, he wondered if it had been something else entirely. Maybe his grandfather hadn't spoken because the words didn't exist. Maybe there was no vocabulary for what he had seen and done. Maybe all the flags and parades and speeches were just a way of filling a silence that could never truly be filled. A docent approached him. She was an elderly woman with white hair and kind eyes, a volunteer in her 70s. She asked if he had any questions. Randall hesitated. Then he pointed at the letter. "He wrote this," Randall said. "Churchill, he wrote this to my president." "Yes," the docent said. "He wrote many letters. They were friends in their way. Comrades." "Comrades," Randall repeated. He looked at the hat in his hands. Yeah, the red hat, the slogan. He turned it over, read the words backward, and slowly, deliberately, placed it in his jacket pocket. He slept poorly that night. The final day arrived. Randall had one more item on his itinerary, though he had not consciously admitted it to himself. He returned to Buckingham Palace. He stood at the edge of the crowd near the Victoria Memorial, watching the guard change with mechanical precision. The drums, the pipes, the shouted commands, the clatter of hooves on wet asphalt. He spotted Lily immediately. She was mounted on the same black horse, her posture unchanged, her face serene. The rain had stopped. Weak sunlight filtered through the clouds. Randall did not approach. He did not speak. He simply watched. Nearby, a young family posed for photographs. The father lifted a toddler onto his shoulders, and the mother adjusted the baby's blanket. A French couple kissed behind a lamppost. A group of Korean students took turns mimicking the guard's stillness, giggling at their own photos. And then something happened that Randall did not expect. A woman emerged from the crowd. She was middle-aged, plainly dressed, carrying a Tesco bag. She approached the barrier and stood directly in front of Lily's horse. For a moment, Randall thought she was going to cause a scene, and he felt a strange pang of sympathy for the guard. But the woman did not shout. She did not gesture. She simply looked up at Lily, her eyes wet, and mouthed 3 words. "Thank you, my daughter." Lily's composure flickered, just barely. Her chin trembled. Her gloved hand moved, not to her weapon, not to her rein, but to her chest, a brief unconscious press against her heart. Now the woman nodded, wiped her eyes, and walked away. Randall stood very still. He did not know that woman's story. He did not know that her daughter, a corporal in the Royal Logistic Corps, had been killed in a training accident 3 years ago, and that this mother now came to the palace every year on her daughter's birthday to stand in front of a guard and pretend, just for a moment, that it was her child up there. He did not know that Lily had been told about this woman by the outgoing guard that morning, and that she had volunteered to take this specific post. He did not know any of this, but he understood, with a clarity that felt like a punch to the sternum, that he had been wrong about everything. He had come to this country to mock a soldier. He had come to lecture a young man about dignity. And all the while, a real people had been living real lives, carrying real grief, upholding real traditions that had nothing to do with politics and everything to do with love. Randall turned away from the railings. He walked slowly toward St. James's Park. He found a bench near the lake and sat down heavily. A swan glided past, indifferent. A jogger huffed along the path. A squirrel investigated his shoelaces. He took out his phone. He stared at the screen. He had 57 unread messages, most of them from men he barely knew, demanding he post another video, insult another foreigner, prove he hadn't gone soft. He opened his camera roll. He looked at the photos he had taken this week. The gates of Windsor, the war memorial, the blank face of a soldier in the rain. He deleted them all. And then he opened a new message and typed 3 words to his daughter. You were right. He did not wait for a reply. He put the phone away, stood up, and walked back toward the hotel to pack. 6 months later, a small parcel arrived at Wellington Barracks, addressed to the King's Guard, marked, "For the soldier on the black horse." Inside was a letter, handwritten on plain white paper. It read, "I don't expect you to remember me. I was loud and rude, and I said things I had no right to say. I came to your country thinking I was better than you. I was wrong. You stood there and took it. You didn't fight back. You didn't have to. You just stood there. And that was enough. That was more than enough. I'm sorry for what I said about your king. I don't know him. I don't know you. But I know now that standing still, like when the whole world is shouting, is the hardest thing a person can do. Thank you for teaching me that." There was no signature, no return address, just a postmark from Tulsa, Oklahoma. Lily Chen read the letter 3 times. Then she folded it carefully, tucked it into the lining of her bearskin cap, and resumed her post. Nelson flicked his ear. The rain began to fall. The tourists raised their umbrellas and snapped their photographs, and the guard stood still,